Welcome back to the Oklahoman's video studio on this Wednesday afternoon. A warm day here in Oklahoma City. Time for our weekly look at politics with Chris Castile, a reporter up in Washington, D.C., who joins us this afternoon via Skype. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, I caught up with you over the weekend. It was great to see you, great to visit. Thanks for carving out some time for us.
Thanks for making the time. It was really fun. It was great to see you.
And of course, Chris offices out of the Washington Examiner, our sister newspaper in Washington, D.C., so it was good to see that and some of the people there. Some of the stories you've worked on since then, we had the Brad Carson piece on Friday. In fact, you and I were talking about that on Friday when that news came out. But then filing period, and you had a lengthy story this week about some of the Oklahoma congressional people, including U.S. Senator James Lankford.
Right. I mean, it's obviously, or it's been obvious, I should say, for a long time that James Lankford, the freshman senator from Oklahoma, was not going to have a serious opponent. Actually, it's been obvious since he won the last 2 years of Tom Coburn's seat in 2014 that he's probably not beatable right now, in today's political climate in Oklahoma. Given, he's just popular. He's, the name recognition from so many years at the Christian summer camp, Falls Creek in eastern Oklahoma. He's just, it's just almost inconceivable that somebody was going to emerge in 2015 or this year and say, I'm going to take on James Lankford. So we're a week away from filing today. From the filing for political office begins at the state election board next week, and nobody of any note at all has come forward. To take on Lankford, you would had to have raised, at least for Oklahoma, which is a small media state, $2 or $3 million at least by now, and be known, have some name recognition. So he's going to skate. He probably won't have a race. And I talked to him about it last week, and he said, look, I'm going to stay engaged, in the state. I'm still going to go to every county. And if I don't have a race, which means, he won't have a race, then I'm going to go to other states and try to help Republicans who may, be in tough races themselves this fall. There are a lot of Republican senators, incumbent senators, up for re-election this year, and he was talking about states like Florida and Ohio, in particular, maybe Illinois, where they may struggle. So there'll be, surrogate visits that he'll be making this fall, I'm sure. And the rest of the delegation, none of them, we have 5 members of the U.S. House. None of them I don't expect any of them to have a real contest either, at least at this point. 2 of them, the Eastern Oklahoma Congressman, Jim Bridenstine of Tulsa, Mark Wayne Mullen of Westville, both of them made term limits pledges in 2012. And so if they abide by those pledges, this will be the last time they will file for office. And, they will immediately be lame ducks in January if they keep their pledge. Mark Wayne Mullen, as you and I discussed last week, still saying that he's going to keep his pledge, but has left the door cracked open a little bit to running again after 2016. But Bridenstine's basically saying, I'm keeping my pledge, I'm out of here.
As you reported, 6 of the 7 members of Oklahoma's congressional delegation expected to file for re-election before the filing period next week, except for Senator Jim Inhofe, who does not have to run this year.
He does not have to, right. A U.S. Senate term, full term is 6 years, and Inhofe won re-election in 2014, so it'll be 2020 before he has to run again. The reason Lankford is running again is because in 2014 he actually just won the last part of Tom Coburn's term, which was just 2 years. So now he's running for a full 6-year term.
We expect to have Representative Steve Russell in this studio on Monday. Now, he will have some challengers. In fact, he faced a couple of these guys last time around, Al McCaffrey and Tom Guild.
Well, they faced each other first, and then Al McCaffrey won that Democratic primary in 2014, and Russell beat McCaffrey pretty handily. He's a former state senator. And I don't think either of those guys are going to be able to raise much money, but Russell already has a challenge on the right there from I think he's retired Navy.
Frank Volpe, of Hera.
Right. Russell himself is retired Army, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, and Russell, he had a lot of Tea Party support. I've hesitated to just call him Tea Party, but I pointed out before that he had a lot of the Tea Party support that like Jim Bridenstine had in Tulsa when Russell won his first term in 2014. But he did not vote every time like the Tea Party would have hoped he would have. So especially like on the big massive catch-all spending bill at the end of last year. Russell voted for that. Tea Party absolutely hates bills like that. So he's drawn an opponent who's already bringing that up, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, Russell has really struggled with campaign debt since he had over $200,000 in debt when he first got to Washington 2 years ago, and I should say a year and a half ago. So he, it's not like he's not going to be able to have. It's not like he won't have money. He will. But he's not going to have a ton. And if this guy can, as Volpe can raise a decent amount, he may be able to put a dent in Russell in the primary.
Chatting via Skype with Chris Castile in Washington, D.C. And let's shift gears a little bit. Look ahead to a story you're working on for this weekend. Earlier this week, you had a chance to talk with some of the guys in the honor flights, and the last one, I'll throw it to you and let you set up that piece.
Thanks, David. I hope not to start weeping during this, but it was, they started the honor flights. I'll just give you a short history of it, really. The honor flights started in 2005. They were started by a former pilot in Ohio. I had the privilege of meeting last year, because the World War II Memorial did not open until 2004. And by then, most of these World War II veterans, all of them, really were well into retirement, past their traveling days. And this Navy pilot was a doctor, and he was working in a veterans home in Ohio, and he was like, how are these men and women going to get to go see their own memorial? I'll tell you how. Somebody's going to have to take them. And so he came up with this idea, and he started the whole thing with fellow pilots as a total excuse me, volunteer privately financed thing, which it still is. And the Oklahoma chapter, this led to chapters of honor flights all over the country. And the Oklahoma chapter began in 2010, and spring of 2010, and has since brought more than 2,000 veterans to Washington, mostly from World War II, to see the war memorials here. And they had their last trip, I think. The last trip that will be Oklahoma only this week, and it's really sad. I would say that it's been one of the highlights of my career to cover these flights through the years. I was at the first one, I was at the last one, and many in between. But really, that narrows it down too much, because really to meet these people has been one of the highlights of my life. And Brian Painter, who worked for us for a long time, felt the same way, and he covered many of these as well. They always, before a flight, they would have a big dinner, a big get-together, either in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, wherever the flight was originating. And they did 24 of these in the past 6 years. And Brian went to so many of those and wrote about them. But he also came here a few times, flew with the veterans to work on feature stories about them. So he and I, for this weekend, are going to do a short kind of first-person piece about what it was like to meet these people. And we'll have a lot of pictures, mostly that Brian and I took, actually, because we didn't have a staff photographer on all of them. And I'm looking to your department to maybe put something together of all the videos that we shot of them through the years. But it's really just been an amazing experience. And some of the pictures that I'm trying to pull to run, I don't believe ever ran in the paper. And I won't go on about this forever. I want to tell you about one. And that is one I took of a veteran at the World War II Memorial, totally surrounded by school children. And he's talking to them. And this is one of the things that I was always, so struck by, so amazed by these visits, because a lot of times there would be some sort of school group of any kind of age also visiting the World War II Memorial at the same time that our veterans showed up for their trip. And inevitably, if they're anywhere near one of the veterans, these school kids would just surround them and ask them, what happened over there? And these veterans, some of whom, probably had never shared some of these experiences, with their own children would talk about it.
I see on your Twitter
I'll never
account.
forget it.
I see on your Twitter account that you mentioned it was a privilege to meet this one gentleman, Cecil Zeke
Zeke,
Ledbetter, 103 years old, making the
right.
trip.
I met him yesterday. Yeah.
So what do you talk to these guys about? What sort of stories
I
do they
asked him.
share? What memories do they have?
That's what I ask him about. First I'll ask. You can see what service they served in. It's on their name tag. His was, I think, the first one I ever saw that said Army Air Force. Usually it's Army Marines. And you ask them where they were. What theater they were in the war, Pacific. Europe, and then what they did. And between me and Brian, we've met people who are at the Battle of the Bulge, at Iwo Jima. These decisive, just legendary battles of that war. At Pearl Harbor, in every theater, I think I've talked to somebody, and we've talked to pilots, we've talked to sailors, infantrymen, mechanics, medics. It's just been amazing.
Ledbetter, as we're talking about you, as you reported, he's out of El Reno, 103 years old, one of 23 veterans making that final Oklahoma honors flight. Chris Castile wrote about it. You can find this story in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com, and look forward to more coverage this weekend, as he mentioned, with longtime reporter Brian Painter teaming up on that. And we do have some video footage that we're going to put together for a video package that'll go with that. Good stuff there. Moving on to a different topic, last night in Wisconsin, we saw the presidential candidates square off again. Any surprises to you? Do we read into anything with Cruz and Sanders getting big wins?
No, I think that the media pretty much prepared us properly for that, notwithstanding what Ted Cruz said last night about. And I think what he said, part of his speech was that the media had said Wisconsin was a great state for Donald Trump. I don't think the media ever said that. That it doesn't, correspond with how these states have gone so far.
But
so,
doesn't every basketball and football team say this? It was us against the world. Nobody believed in it. It's like everybody says that now.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, you kind of set up this straw man to knock it down. But yeah, so I think maybe the margin that Sanders beat Clinton by surprised me a little bit, but, not much, given the demographics of that state, and just given that, say in Oklahoma, for example, how well he did in college towns, how well with young people he does in every state, So I think that's where they organize, that's where they get people out, and, they just absolutely creamed her in that state. But, now, the next is New York, and then you've got a whole, which is in 2 weeks, and then a whole bunch of states on April 26th. So, I think that this race really didn't that really didn't mean much. Yes, it's like we'll quit talking about it tomorrow, for sure. Because it was fairly well predicted before it happened, and there'll be a lot of speculation about was this a great victory for the Stop Trump movement. They spent all this money on ads in Wisconsin, trashing Trump, and Cruz wins. Well, we'll see. Let's move on to the next state and see how well they do. But it has, of course, as we've talked, a couple times already, fueled more talk about, well, what happens at, a convention if Trump can't get the majority, and, that ball hasn't moved down the field much.
Interesting to see. It's our weekly report with Chris Castile. Chris will let you go today, but on one final topic, Merle Haggard passed away. He was 79. You've met him before, right?
I met him once. It was such a thrill. He and his family, well, he was not born yet, I should say, but his family, his parents, and I believe 2 older siblings, were part of the Okie movement west to California in the 30s, and there was an exhibition. It's actually still at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. It's about all the various modes of transportation that developed in America and how it allowed people to move. And one part of it has about the car has a stretch of Route 60, a real piece of Route 66, the highway from Oklahoma. And his family traveled on Route 66, as did all the, quote, Okies, during the Dust Bowl to California. They wound up in Bakersfield. And when this exhibit opened in 2003, Merle Haggard and his sister came and donated a bunch of the belongings that they still had, the Haggard family belongings, that made that trip from Chakota, Oklahoma to Bakersfield, California. And it's part of that exhibit. And I got to talk to him at that event. And he was just so interesting. He and his sister both were really interesting. So very sad. He wrote some just amazing songs. Mama Tried and Okie from Muskogee, of course. They're just sad. And it's his birthday. He died on his birthday.
Oh, wow.
79th birthday.
Merle Haggard, 79. Chris Castile, as always, we appreciate chatting with you each week.
All right, Dave.
More coverage from Chris can be found online at newsok.com and in the Oklahoman. And look forward to this weekend's coverage of the honor flights as Chris and Brian Painter pair up for that. And for those watching some live video here on newsok.com, we'll stop down. We'll come back at 2 o'clock with a press conference over at the Oklahoma City Police Station.